Have you ever thought of someone you haven't seen in years, and then, almost quietly, your phone lights up with their name? Moments like that tend to stop us for a second. We smile, maybe shake our head, and say, "What a coincidence." Then we move on. But something in us lingers. Something feels touched, as if a thin thread inside the chest has been gently pulled. For a long time, we were taught to dismiss these moments, to explain them away, to believe that life is mostly random, and that each of us is walking alone inside our own sealed bubble. Separate bodies, separate minds, separate lives. Yet modern science unexpectedly, almost reluctantly, has begun to whisper a very different story. In the quiet laboratories of quantum physics, researchers discovered something that shook the foundations of how we understand reality. They observed that two tiny particles, once connected, remain connected forever. Even if you send one particle to the other side of the universe and keep the other here on Earth, they still move together. When one changes, the other responds instantly. No signal traveling, no time delay, no visible bridge between them. This phenomenon is called quantum entanglement. At first, even the scientists didn't like it. Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance, because it violated everything classical physics stood for. How could two things be separate in space, yet behave as if they were one? How could distance become irrelevant? But the experiments kept repeating the same quiet truth, over and over again. The universe was not behaving like a collection of isolated objects. It was behaving like a single, deeply interconnected field. And that's where the story gently turns toward us. Because you are not made of something different from those particles. Every cell in your body, every neuron in your brain, every breath you take is woven from the same quantum fabric. The same reality that allows two particles to remain linked across galaxies is the reality that shaped your heart, your thoughts, your memories. So when we ask, if the most fundamental building blocks of the universe are never truly separate, what does that say about human beings? We are no longer asking a philosophical question. We are asking a scientific one. Perhaps those moments we call coincidence are not mistakes in the system. Perhaps they are glimpses of how the system actually works. Think about intuition for a moment. That quiet knowing that arrives without evidence. You feel uneasy about a situation before anything goes wrong. You sense warmth towards someone you barely know. You suddenly think of a loved one and feel compelled to reach out. Without a logical reason. We've been trained to mistrust these experiences because they don't come with spreadsheets or equations. But quantum science tells us something profound. Information does not always travel the way we think it does. At the deepest level of reality, everything exists within a shared field. A field where separation is more appearance than truth. In that kind of universe, intuition doesn't look irrational anymore. It looks natural. Just as two entangled particles know about each other instantly, perhaps our nervous systems, our hearts, and our awareness are constantly sensing subtle shifts in the same underlying field. Not through effort, not through control, but through resonance. Like two tuning forks placed in the same room. Strike one, and the other begins to vibrate. No pushing, no forcing, just alignment. This also begins to explain why emotions seem to travel across distance so effortlessly. You've probably felt it before. Someone close to you is struggling, and even though they haven't said a word, you feel heavy. Or someone you love is joyful, and your own chest feels lighter. Almost without explanation, we often say we're picking up on their energy, as if that's just a poetic phrase. But what if it's more literal than we thought? What if emotional resonance is not something mystical, but something deeply physical, something rooted in the same entangled structure that binds the universe together? In such a reality, love is no longer just a chemical reaction in the brain. It becomes a state of coherence, a shared rhythm, a subtle synchronization between two expressions of the same field. That's why real connection feels familiar, not exciting in a dramatic way, but grounding, like coming home. like a river finally stopping its struggle and flowing in the direction it was always meant to go. And this is where many people quietly realize something important about their loneliness. Most of us don't feel alone because we truly are alone. We feel alone because we've been taught to believe we are separate. We've been told directly and indirectly that we must carry life by ourselves. That strength means independence. That vulnerability is weakness. That asking for support means you've failed somehow. But that belief doesn't match the structure of reality. Quantum entanglement shows us a universe that does not isolate its parts. It shows us a cosmos that functions through relationship, correlation, and mutual influence. Nothing exists on its own. Everything arises in connection. So, when you feel disconnected, it may not be a sign that something is wrong with you. It may be a sign that you are holding a belief that no longer fits the truth of how life actually works. And here's the gentlest part of this realization. You don't have to do anything to reconnect. You don't have to force positivity. You don't have to think harder. You don't have to fix yourself. Connection is already the default state, like gravity. It doesn't need your permission to exist. It only needs your resistance to soften. When you stop tightening around fear, when you stop trying to control outcomes, when you allow yourself to feel what's present without judgment, something shifts. Not because you made it shift, but because you stopped blocking what was already there. Awareness begins to open. Breath deepens. The body remembers that it belongs. And in that remembering, the illusion of isolation starts to dissolve. You realize you are not a fragment drifting in a hostile universe. You are a localized expression of a vast, intelligent field that is constantly communicating with itself through sensation, through emotion, through subtle knowing. Quantum entanglement doesn't tell us that life is magical in a fantasy sense. It tells us something quieter, and far more powerful. Separation was never as real as we thought. And once you see that, even briefly, something changes in how you walk through the world. You listen more. You judge less. You hold your experiences with softer hands, not because someone told you to be spiritual, but because the truth feels obvious. Like finally realizing the ocean was always carrying the wave. You were never truly alone. You were just momentarily focused on the surface, instead of the field beneath it. 1. What quantum entanglement really is explained for ordinary human beings. There is a quiet moment in physics when complexity suddenly becomes very simple, and quantum entanglement lives exactly in that space. You don't need advanced mathematics to feel it. You only need the willingness to set aside what you were taught about separation for just a moment. The same way you might set down a heavy bag after carrying it for too long. Quantum entanglement begins with two particles that are created together, not metaphorically together, not around the same time, but born from the same event, like twins emerging from a single breath of the universe. From the very beginning, they are not experienced as two separate things by nature. They are described as one system, expressed in two locations. That detail matters more than it first appears. When these particles separate, something extraordinary remains. Distance does not weaken their connection. You can place one particle here, on Earth, and send the other across the galaxy, and yet their relationship does not stretch, fade, or decay. When one particle changes its state, the other responds immediately, not quickly, not almost instantly, as if space itself had nothing to say about it. There is no signal traveling between them, no message being sent, no hidden wire connecting the two. In fact, physics has confirmed that no information is moving between them at all in the classical sense. And this is where many people feel uncomfortable, because we were raised to believe that everything must travel from point A to point B. Cause here, effect there. Distance always matters. Quantum entanglement gently dismantles that assumption. What it shows instead is that, at the deepest level of reality, some things are not separate objects interacting across space. They are a single, unified system appearing in multiple places. The change does not travel. The change simply is. The universe updates itself all at once, like a single breath moving through the whole body. For a long time, Scientists hoped this effect was a misunderstanding. Even Einstein resisted it, not because it was wrong, but because it challenged the very structure of how reality had been described for centuries. Yet experiment after experiment confirmed the same unsettling truth. This was not philosophy. This was not spiritual speculation. This was measurable, repeatable, and undeniable. Quantum entanglement is not a theory that might be true someday. It is a demonstrated feature of how the universe operates. And here is where we slow down, because this is not just a scientific point. It is a human one. Everything you call you is made of these same particles. Your body is not separate from the quantum world. Your brain is not exempt. Your emotions, your memories, your nervous system all arise from the same fabric that allows entanglement to exist. The universe did not suddenly switch rules when it formed your heart. So when we say that two entangled particles remain connected regardless of distance, we are not describing an exotic exception. We are describing the fundamental nature of reality itself, a reality in which separation is not as absolute as it appears. Think about how that lands when applied gently to your own life. We are taught, often without being asked, that we are isolated units navigating a hostile world, that we must protect ourselves, define ourselves, defend our boundaries constantly. Over time, this belief tightens the body and narrows the mind. It creates a quiet tension we learn to live with, mistaking it for strength. But quantum entanglement tells a different story beneath all of that conditioning. It suggests that connection is not something you create. It is something you remember. It is not earned through effort. It is built into the structure of existence. This doesn't mean that everything is magically harmonious or that life avoids pain. Entangled particles do not prevent chaos. They simply reveal that even chaos unfolds within relationship. Nothing exists in isolation. Not even suffering, not even confusion, not even loss. When one particle changes, the other does not ask why. It does not resist. It does not need reassurance. The response happens naturally, because connection is not something it has to maintain. It is what it is. This understanding carries a quiet invitation. If the universe itself does not rely on force to stay connected, perhaps we don't need to force connection either. Perhaps much of our exhaustion comes from trying to manufacture belonging instead of allowing it. Quantum entanglement does not ask you to believe anything new. It simply asks you to notice what has always been there. The subtle sense that some things in life are known before they are explained. That some bonds do not weaken with time or distance. That certain people, moments, or truths feel close, even when they are far away. These are not errors in perception. They are echoes of a deeper order. When we stop trying to reduce reality into manageable, disconnected pieces, something softens. The mind relaxes its grip. The body releases its quiet vigilance. And in that release, understanding arises not as information, but as recognition, like realizing you were never lost, only temporarily distracted. Quantum entanglement does not promise comfort. It offers clarity. It shows us a universe that is not fragmented, but relational, not cold, but coherent, not distant, but intimately involved with itself at every level. And when that truth settles, even gently, it begins to change how we stand inside our own lives. We become less defensive, less hurried, less alone, not because the world suddenly changed, but because we finally saw it as it has always been. 2. What truly confused the scientists: there is no distance in the deepest layer of reality. There is a moment in every genuine discovery when certainty dissolves, when even the most confident experts must admit that the world is not behaving the way they were taught it should. Quantum entanglement brought scientists into exactly that moment, not loudly or dramatically, but quietly, persistently, with results that refused to fit inside familiar boxes. For centuries, physics was built on a simple assumption: space separates things, and time orders events. If something happens here, and something else happens there, then something must travel between them. Distance mattered. Delay mattered. Everything followed a sequence. This framework worked beautifully for planets, machines, and everyday life, so no one questioned it too deeply. But when scientists began exploring the quantum world, the floor slowly gave way beneath that certainty. In experiment after experiment, particles behaved as if space itself had no authority over them. Two entangled particles did not care how far apart they were, whether separated by a few centimeters or by light years. Their behavior remained coordinated, not influenced. Coordinated, as if the idea of distance simply did not apply at that level. This was not just strange, it was deeply unsettling, because if distance can disappear, then something even more fundamental must be questioned. Time, too, begins to lose its grip. The response between entangled particles does not wait. It does not arrive after, it arrives simultaneously. The language of before and after becomes awkward, almost meaningless. What this suggests is not that space and time are illusions in the everyday sense, but that they are not the deepest layer of reality. They may be tools the universe uses to organize experience at a human scale, while something far more unified exists beneath them. At the quantum level, reality begins to resemble a single field, rather than a collection of objects. A vast, continuous presence in which everything is already connected, already informed, already in relationship. Scientists sometimes call this a field of information, though even that phrase struggles to capture what is being observed. In this field, nothing needs to travel, because nothing is truly apart. This is the point where science and inner knowing quietly meet, not as belief, but as recognition. Many people have sensed this long before physics gave it a name. They felt it in moments of deep presence, in grief that crossed oceans, in love that did not fade with absence, in knowing that arrived without explanation. The difference now is that science is no longer dismissing these experiences as subjective accidents. It is discovering that the structure of reality itself allows them. To understand this more gently, imagine the ocean. On the surface, you see waves. Each wave looks separate. One rises here, another falls there. They appear to collide, to move independently, to be born and die. But beneath the surface, there is only water, one body, moving through countless expressions. The waves are not disconnected events. They are patterns arising from the same underlying whole. Quantum physics suggests that space and time may be like the surface of the ocean, useful, real at their level, but not the final truth. Beneath them lies a deeper unity, where everything exists together, where information is shared instantly because it was never divided to begin with. This realization deeply challenged scientists because it required letting go of control. Measurement, prediction, and certainty all rely on separation. You measure this thing here, at this time, relative to that thing there. But in a reality where separation dissolves, the observer cannot remain untouched. And this is where the conversation turns inward. Because human beings are not just observers of this universe. We are participants within it. Our consciousness does not float above reality. It arises from the same field that gives rise to particles, stars, and galaxies. If space and time soften at the deepest level of reality, then the way we experience ourselves may also be shaped by that deeper unity. This does not mean your daily life stops having structure. You still wake up, make choices, feel consequences. But it does suggest that beneath the story of me here, world out there, something far more intimate is unfolding. Many people feel this most clearly in moments when effort drops away. When they stop trying to fix, control, or explain everything. When they sit quietly with themselves, not seeking answers, just allowing awareness to rest. In those moments, the sense of being a separate object inside a hostile world often softens. Something opens, something remembers. That remembering is not dramatic. It does not come with visions or proclamations. It feels simple, familiar, like realizing you have been holding your breath without noticing, and then finally letting the air move again. The idea of a shared information field also explains why forcing understanding never works. You cannot intellectually push your way into this truth, just as you cannot force a wave to understand the ocean by thinking harder. Understanding arises through alignment, through resonance, through quiet attention. Scientists faced the same limitation. The equations worked, but the intuition resisted. It took humility to accept that the universe was not obligated to make sense according to human expectations. It took patience to sit with uncertainty without immediately trying to conquer it. In that way, the scientific journey mirrors the inner one. We spend much of our lives trying to manage distance, emotional distance, psychological distance, distance between who we are and who we think we should be. We believe safety comes from control, from clear boundaries, from certainty, yet the deeper truth seems to point in the opposite direction. At the most fundamental level, life is not built on separation, but on relationship. This does not erase individuality. Waves are still waves. You are still you, but individuality exists within connection, not outside of it. The wave does not disappear when it remembers the ocean. It simply stops fearing it. When scientists realized that space and time dissolve at the quantum level, they did not conclude that reality is meaningless. They discovered that it is far more intimate than they imagined. The universe is not a stage where isolated actors perform. It is a living field, constantly communicating with itself through countless forms. And you are one of those forms. This understanding changes how we relate to our own experience. Pain no longer feels like proof of abandonment. Confusion no longer feels like failure. Even loneliness begins to reveal itself as a temporary perception, not an ultimate truth. Because if there is no absolute distance at the deepest level of reality, then nothing is ever truly cut off. Not you, not your past, not the people you love, not the parts of yourself you thought were lost. They are all held within the same field, waiting not to be chased, but to be noticed. This is not a mystical escape from life. It is a deeper entry into it, a willingness to stand inside uncertainty without panic, to trust connection without clinging, to allow understanding to arise rather than demanding it. When you stop insisting that reality must be fragmented in order to be manageable, you discover that wholeness is not overwhelming, it is relieving. Like finally realizing the ground has always been beneath your feet, even when you were afraid to look down. And in that realization, something settles. The need to rush fades. The fear of distance loosens. You don't need to cross the universe to belong to it. You are already inside it, and it has never stopped holding you. 3. If particles are not separate, are human beings truly separate from one another? There comes a point, when you stay with this understanding long enough, where the question can no longer be avoided. If the smallest building blocks of reality refuse to exist in isolation, if separation collapses at the deepest layer of the universe, then what does that say about us? About human beings who are built from the very same substance. This is not a poetic leap. It is a grounded one. Your body is not something added on top of the universe. It is made from it. Every cell, every atom, every subatomic particle inside you follows the same rules that govern distant stars and invisible quantum fields. The universe did not stop being quantum when it became human. It simply became more intimate. When scientists look deeply enough, the boundary between matter and energy begins to blur. What we call a solid body is mostly empty space, held together by relationships, probabilities, and interactions that exist far beyond our senses. At the quantum level, nothing is as fixed or independent as it appears. So when we speak about entangled particles remaining connected across distance, we are not talking about something foreign to the human experience. We are talking about the very foundation of what allows a human experience to exist at all. This is where the question softens into something deeply personal. If your body arises from a field that does not recognize absolute separation, then perhaps your inner life does not either. Perhaps consciousness itself is not sealed inside the skull, isolated and alone, but is participating in a much larger network of connection. This idea can feel uncomfortable at first, especially for those of us who learn to survive by becoming self-contained. Many people carry the belief that being separate is what keeps them safe. You rely on yourself. You manage your own emotions. You don't lean too far into connection because connection once hurt. That instinct makes sense. It was learned honestly. But truth has a way of gently inviting us beyond our defenses when we are ready. Consider how emotions behave. You walk into a room, and without a word being spoken, you can feel tension, warmth, grief, or ease. No one has explained anything to you, yet your body knows. Your chest tightens, your breath adjusts. Your nervous system responds before your mind can label the experience. This is not imagination. This is sensitivity. Now imagine this sensitivity not as a personal quirk, but as a natural function of a system designed to be relational. If consciousness operates within a shared field, then emotional resonance makes sense. Information does not need to be spoken to be felt. It only needs coherence. The same is true for intuition. Intuition is often described as mysterious because it does not arrive through linear reasoning. It comes quietly, whole, without explanation. You know something before you know why. You feel a pull, a warning, a sense of rightness or unease. And only later does the story catch up. From the perspective of separation, intuition seems unreliable, even dangerous. But from the perspective of a connected field, intuition looks like awareness, responding to information that has not yet been translated into conscious thought, just as entangled particles respond without delay because they are not truly separate. Perhaps human awareness can respond to subtle shifts in the same underlying field, not through effort, not through belief, simply through presence. This does not require mysticism. It requires humility. Science is beginning to accept that consciousness may not be a byproduct of the brain alone, but something that interacts with the brain, something that participates in reality rather than merely observing it. The brain may function less like a generator and more like a receiver, tuning into patterns that already exist. If that is true, then the idea of being fundamentally isolated begins to unravel. And this unraveling can be deeply healing. Many people spend years trying to fix themselves, thinking something is wrong because they feel disconnected, empty, or unseen. They assume the problem lies within them, a personal flaw, a failure to be strong enough or positive enough. But what if the pain of disconnection is not a defect, but a signal? What if loneliness is not proof of separation, but a reminder of connection forgotten? When you believe you are separate, life feels like a constant negotiation. You protect yourself, you perform, you calculate, you brace. Over time, this creates exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to cure. The body stays tense, as if guarding against a threat that never fully leaves. But when the possibility of deep connection is allowed back into awareness, something begins to loosen. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough for the breath to drop a little lower, for the shoulders to soften, for the heart to feel less armored. You begin to sense that you do not have to hold everything together by yourself. This does not mean boundaries disappear. Healthy boundaries still matter. Waves still have shape, but the wave no longer believes it must defend itself against the ocean. It moves with it. In a connected reality, individuality is not erased. It is contextualized. You are not less because you are connected. You are more, because your existence is supported by something larger than personal effort. This understanding also reshapes how we see relationships. When two people feel deeply connected, it is often described as chemistry, or timing, or fate. But perhaps what is being experienced is resonance. Two expressions of the same field recognizing harmony in one another. Not ownership, not dependency, recognition. That recognition does not always last forever. Relationships change, just as wave patterns change. But the field remains. The connection was never lost. It's simply transformed. This perspective allows grief to soften without denying it. Loss still hurts. Absence is still felt. But pain is no longer interpreted as abandonment by reality. It becomes part of a larger movement, held within something that does not disappear when forms change. Even conflict begins to look different. When you no longer see others as fundamentally separate, opposition loses its sharp edge. Disagreement remains, but dehumanization fades. You can hold your truth without needing to destroy another's. This is not moral superiority. It is clarity. When you understand that consciousness, emotion, and intuition may be operating within a shared field, compassion stops being a rule you follow and becomes a natural response. You recognize yourself, however faintly, in every other form. And here is the simplest truth beneath all of this. You do not need to prove connection. You do not need to force it. You do not need to convince yourself of it. Connection is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. The moment you stop tightening around the idea of being alone, the moment you stop demanding certainty before trust, the moment you rest your attention in what is actually present rather than what you fear might be missing, connection begins to reveal itself, quietly, gently, honestly, like realizing the warmth you were searching for was already in your hands, waiting for you to stop clenching your fists. If particles are not separate, then separation was never the foundation of reality. It was a surface appearance, useful for navigation, but never the truth beneath. And if that is so, then human beings were never meant to live as isolated fragments, struggling to survive in an indifferent universe. We were meant to experience ourselves as participants in a living field, learning, forgetting, remembering, and learning again. You are not late to this understanding. You are not behind. You are not broken for having forgotten it. You are simply remembering what was always true, in the only way it can be remembered: slowly, gently, through lived experience. And in that remembering, something settles. The question of whether you truly belong begins to fade, not because it was answered, but because it was no longer needed. You were never outside the connection you were searching for. You were always inside it, learning how to feel it again. 4. Intuition, the subtle language of entanglement. There are moments in life when you know something without knowing how you know it. And these moments tend to arrive quietly, without announcement, without evidence, without the kind of logic we were trained to trust. You simply know, not as a thought, not as a conclusion, but as a feeling that settles somewhere deep in the body, steady and calm, long before the mind has a chance to argue with it. Most of us were taught to be suspicious of this kind of knowing. We were told that unless something can be explained, step by step, it should not be trusted. And so, over time, many people learn to override intuition, to silence it, to call it coincidence or imagination, even when it kept returning with gentle persistence. But intuition never disappears. It waits. From the perspective of a connected universe, intuition begins to look less like a mysterious gift and more like a natural function. If reality is not made of isolated parts but of relationships within a shared field, then awareness does not need to rely solely on logic to receive information. It can feel it. It can resonate with it. It can recognize patterns before they become visible on the surface. Quantum entanglement offers a quiet metaphor for this. Two particles respond to each other not because they send messages, but because they are already part of the same system. Nothing travels. Nothing needs to be forced. The response arises from connection itself. In much the same way, intuition does not shout instructions or deliver speeches. It responds. It adjusts. It nudges. It is awareness picking up subtle shifts in the field before the mind organizes them into words. Think about how intuition usually speaks. It rarely comes as panic. When it is clear, it feels grounded, almost neutral. There is no urgency, no drama, no demand. Just a sense of alignment or misalignment, like stepping onto solid ground or realizing a step is missing before you fall. Many people confuse intuition with fear, especially if they have lived through pain or instability. Fear is loud. It contracts the body. It rushes the breath. It demands immediate action. Intuition, by contrast, feels spacious. Even when it warns, it does not overwhelm. It simply informs. This difference matters. When you begin to see intuition as a form of resonance rather than a mystical signal, it becomes easier to trust it. You no longer need to romanticize it or turn it into something supernatural. You can relate to it the way you relate to balance, or hunger, or warmth. It is the body-mind system responding intelligently to its environment. And that environment, at the deepest level, is not fragmented. Consider how often you have sensed something before it happened. You thought of someone moments before they called. You felt uneasy about a decision that looked perfect on paper. You felt drawn toward a path you could not justify, only to understand much later why it mattered. At the time, you may have ignored these signals. Many of us did. We learned to trust logic over feeling, even when logic arrived too late to prevent regret. But if you look back honestly, you may notice a pattern. Intuition was present long before the outcome became clear. This is not because intuition predicts the future. It does not operate in timelines the way the mind does. It operates in coherence. It senses whether something aligns with the deeper movement of your life, whether it flows with the current or against it, like standing near the ocean and feeling the pull of the tide before the wave reaches shore. From a quantum perspective, this makes sense. If consciousness participates in a shared informational field, then awareness does not need to wait for events to unfold sequentially in order to respond. It can register subtle correlations as they arise, not intellectually, but experientially. This does not mean intuition is always correct in a literal sense. Just as any form of perception, it can be distorted by fear, expectation, or unresolved pain. But when intuition is clear, it carries a distinct quality. It feels simple, clean, unforced. People who have walked through loss, illness, or deep inner struggle often recognize this quality more easily. Pain strips away illusions. It humbles the mind. It forces attention inward. And in that inward turning, intuition often reawakens. Not as a tool, but as a companion. Many of the people listening to this have likely experienced moments when intuition was the only thing that made sense. When logic failed, when explanations ran out, when something inside quietly said, "This way," and following it felt like survival rather than choice. Those moments are not anomalies. They are reminders. They remind us that we are not navigating life alone, using only limited information gathered through the senses. We are embedded in something larger, something responsive, something intelligent that moves through us as awareness. This does not require belief. It requires attention. Intuition becomes clearer, not when you try harder to hear it, but when you stop drowning it out. When you soften the constant mental commentary, when you allow pauses, when you give yourself permission to not know everything immediately. Stillness is not emptiness. It is sensitivity. The more you practice listening without demanding answers, the more intuition feels like a natural extension of perception rather than a mysterious interruption. It stops feeling special and starts feeling normal. This is where many people misunderstand the role of effort. They try to develop intuition by forcing techniques, rituals, or mental exercises. But intuition does not respond to pressure. It responds to openness, like a river that flows more freely when you stop trying to push it upstream. In a connected universe, intuition is not about accessing hidden powers. It is about reducing interference, letting the system do what it already knows how to do, allowing awareness to align with the field instead of constantly overriding it with fear or control. This is also why intuition deepens with age, if we let it. As life teaches us what does not work, we gradually loosen our grip on certainty. We become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. And in that honesty, intuition finds room to breathe. When you trust intuition, you are not abandoning reason. You are restoring balance. Logic becomes a tool, not a tyrant. Thought supports awareness instead of dominating it. This balance is deeply healing. Many people feel fractured because they have learned to live almost entirely from the neck up, disconnected from the wisdom of the body and the quiet intelligence of awareness. Intuition reunites these parts. It brings thinking back into relationship with feeling, and feeling back into relationship with presence. And presence is where connection lives. The more present you are, the more sensitive you become to subtle shifts. You notice when something feels off, even if it looks right. You notice when something feels right, even if it looks uncertain. This is not recklessness. It is coherence. In a universe shaped by entanglement, coherence matters more than control. You do not need to force life to make sense. You need to listen for how it moves. Intuition is not asking you to abandon responsibility or reason. It is asking you to include the full spectrum of intelligence available to you. When you look back at your life through this lens, intuition may reveal itself as a quiet guide that never left, only waited for permission. It was there when you ignored it. It was there when you doubted it. It was there when you followed it and felt relief without knowing why. It does not judge you for forgetting it. It does not punish you for mistrust. It simply responds when you are ready. And readiness does not come from effort. It comes from honesty. The honesty to admit that not everything meaningful can be explained. The honesty to admit that control has limits. The honesty to admit that sometimes the most reliable guidance arrives without words. Intuition is not magic. It is memory. Memory of connection. Memory of belonging. Memory of a reality where nothing is truly isolated and nothing moves alone. When you allow intuition to speak again, gently, patiently, without demanding proof, you are not becoming less rational. You are becoming more whole. You are learning to hear the subtle language of entanglement, spoken not in equations or arguments, but in felt sense, in quiet knowing, in the simple recognition that you are part of something responsive and alive. And in that recognition, life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a relationship to listen to, not rushed, not forced, just allowed. 5. Emotional transmission. Why sorrow and joy can travel across distance. There are moments when emotion arrives without invitation, without explanation, and without a visible source. You wake up feeling heavy, even though nothing in your immediate life seems wrong. Or you suddenly feel a warmth in your chest, a quiet lift in your spirit, and only later discover that someone you love just experienced something meaningful. No words were exchanged, no message was sent, yet something moved. Most people learn to doubt these experiences. We tell ourselves we are imagining things, projecting feelings, or being overly sensitive. We try to explain the moment away because it does not fit neatly into how we were taught emotions should work. Emotions, we were told, are personal, private, contained inside individual minds and bodies. But lived experience keeps gently contradicting that story. When someone close to you is grieving, you may feel it before you know it. Your body reacts. Your energy drops. Your thoughts slow. You cannot point to a cause. Yet the feeling is unmistakable. It is not empathy in the intellectual sense. You are not thinking about their pain. You are feeling it, as if the boundary between you softened without asking for permission. This is not weakness. This is sensitivity. Quantum entanglement offers a quiet framework for understanding this phenomenon, not as something mystical, but as something natural within a connected universe. If particles remain linked regardless of distance, if changes in one part of a system are reflected instantly in another, then it becomes reasonable to ask whether emotional states might also move within a shared field, not as messages, not as signals traveling through space, but as resonance within something already unified. Human beings are emotional systems, not isolated machines. Our nervous systems respond constantly to subtle cues, many of which never reach conscious awareness. When relationships are deep, those systems become attuned to one another over time, just as two instruments tuned to the same frequency begin to vibrate together. People in meaningful relationships often fall into emotional coherence. This coherence does not require proximity. It is not limited by miles, time zones, or silence. Think about how relationships form in the first place. True connection does not arise from constant interaction alone. It arises from shared presence, shared vulnerability, shared moments where defenses fall away. Over time, something aligns, a rhythm develops, a familiarity that goes beyond memory. Once that rhythm exists, it does not disappear simply because people are apart. From a quantum perspective, this makes sense. If consciousness and emotion arise within a shared informational field, then emotional shifts do not need to be communicated in linear ways to be felt. They emerge within the field and are registered by those attuned to it. This does not mean you are absorbing other people's emotions helplessly. It means you are participating in a relational system that is far more subtle and intelligent than we were taught to recognize. Many people feel overwhelmed by this idea because they associate emotional sensitivity with loss of control. They fear being consumed by others' feelings, losing themselves, or becoming emotionally unsafe. These fears often come from real experiences where boundaries were not respected, but sensitivity and self-erasure are not the same thing. The problem is not that emotions travel. The problem is that we were never taught how to relate to this truth with awareness. We were taught to either shut down completely or to drown in what we feel. Neither option is balanced. When you understand emotional transmission as resonance rather than invasion, something changes. You realize that you can feel without being overtaken. You can notice without identifying. You can allow the wave to pass through without believing it defines you. This understanding is deeply healing. It explains why some relationships leave a lasting imprint, even after they end, why certain people remain emotionally close, even when circumstances change, why grief does not follow logic, and why love does not obey distance. These experiences are not flaws in the system. They are expressions of it. Quantum entanglement does not tell us that everything is emotionally connected all the time. It tells us that connection persists where coherence exists. Emotional transmission happens most clearly in relationships marked by authenticity, presence, and mutual openness. That is why superficial connections rarely carry emotional weight across distance, while deep ones do. Depth creates alignment. Alignment allows resonance. And resonance does not ask permission from geography. This perspective also reframes how we understand joy. We often talk about joy as something individual, something we generate or achieve. But joy, like sorrow, has a way of spreading. You feel lighter when someone you love succeeds. You feel warmth when you hear good news, even if it has nothing to do with you. Joy does not need ownership to move. In a connected reality, joy and sorrow are not personal possessions. They are movements within the field. They arise, pass through, and affect everything they touch. This does not make them less meaningful. It makes them more honest. Many people resist this idea because it challenges the belief that emotional independence is the highest form of strength. We are taught to be unaffected, to be self-contained, to not let others influence us. But this ideal often leads to numbness rather than resilience. True resilience comes from flexibility, not rigidity. When you allow emotions to move without clinging or resisting, they complete their natural cycle. They inform, they connect, they release suppression. On the other hand, traps emotional energy inside the body, creating tension that has nowhere to go. Understanding emotional transmission allows you to respond instead of react. You notice when sadness arises and ask, gently, "Is this mine?" Not as a defense, but as curiosity. You notice when joy appears and allow it, without questioning whether you deserve it. This awareness creates space. Space is what allows sensitivity to become wisdom rather than overwhelm. From this space, compassion becomes effortless. You no longer need to force yourself to care. You care because you feel the reality of connection. Compassion is not a moral obligation in a connected universe. It is a natural response to recognition. You recognize yourself in others, not intellectually, but experientially. This does not mean you carry everyone's pain. It means you understand that pain does not belong to isolated individuals. It moves through relationship, seeking acknowledgement, seeking integration, And this understanding can be profoundly relieving. Many people blame themselves for feeling heavy without knowing why. They assume something is wrong with them. They try to fix the feeling, distract from it, or analyze it endlessly. But sometimes, the most honest response is simply to feel and allow. Emotion is information, not instruction. It does not always require action. Sometimes it only requires presence. When you allow emotional transmission without judgment, something softens. You stop fighting the feeling. You stop personalizing it. You stop believing that every sensation must be solved. You become a witness rather than a battleground. In relationships, this awareness deepens intimacy without entanglement. You can feel someone's sadness and still remain grounded. You can share joy without losing yourself. You can connect without collapsing. This is what maturity looks like in a connected world. It is not emotional distance. It is emotional clarity. Quantum entanglement does not romanticize emotion. It contextualizes it. It shows us that feeling deeply is not a flaw, and numbness is not strength. It shows us that connection does not weaken us. It reveals us. When you look back on your life through this lens, you may notice how often your most meaningful moments were shared emotionally. Even when words were few or absent, you may remember times when a feeling led you toward truth before facts arrived. These moments were not accidents. They were expressions of a reality where nothing meaningful happens in isolation. And perhaps the most healing realization of all is this: you do not need to protect yourself from connection. You need to learn how to stay present within it. When you stop resisting emotional transmission, when you stop fearing sensitivity, when you allow yourself to feel without drowning, life becomes less threatening and more relational. You are no longer a closed system defending its borders. You are an open participant in a living field that moves through sorrow and joy alike, not to harm you, but to remind you that you were never meant to walk this world untouched. You were meant to be moved, not broken, not overwhelmed, just moved, in the quiet, human way that only connection allows. And in that movement, something essential heals, not because the pain disappeared, but because it was finally allowed to pass through what was always designed to feel. 6. Love is not just an emotion, it is a state of resonance. At some point in life, usually after love has both lifted us and broken us, a quiet realization begins to form. The deepest love we have known did not feel dramatic all the time. It did not always feel exciting or intense. More often, it felt familiar, settling, as if something inside finally exhaled and said, "This makes sense." Many people describe this as a feeling of belonging, not ownership, not dependency, but recognition. You meet someone and, without knowing why, there is a sense of having known them before, not necessarily in another lifetime, but in another layer of yourself. Conversation flows easily. Silence feels safe. You are not performing. You are not bracing. You are simply present. This quality of love has confused poets, philosophers, and scientists alike, because it does not fit neatly into the usual explanations. If love were only a chemical reaction, it would not feel this steady. If it were only emotional attachment, it would not feel this calm. If it were only desire, it would not deepen with time. There is something else happening here. Quantum physics offers a gentle lens through which to view this experience, not as a reduction of love, but as an expansion of how we understand it. In a universe where entanglement exists, where parts of a system remain coordinated, regardless of distance, it becomes possible to see love not as something we generate, but as something we enter into. Love, in this sense, is not an emotion that comes and goes. It is a state of resonance. When two people resonate, they do not merge into one indistinguishable mass, nor do they remain rigidly separate. They become aligned. Their inner rhythms begin to synchronize, nervous systems attune, emotional patterns soften around one another. Over time, even thought patterns begin to subtly adjust. This is not control, it is coherence. Just as two tuning forks placed near each other begin to vibrate at the same frequency. Two people in deep connection begin to influence one another without effort. No one is trying to change anyone. No one is forcing harmony. The alignment happens naturally because the conditions allow it. This is why real love often feels effortless, even when life itself is not. It is also why love can feel unsettling to those who are used to protecting themselves. Resonance requires openness. It requires allowing yourself to be affected. And for those who learned early on that being affected meant being hurt, this can feel dangerous. Many people mistake love for intensity because intensity feels alive. But intensity is often driven by instability, by fear of loss, by unresolved wounds seeking relief. Resonance, by contrast, feels quiet. It does not rush. It does not demand constant proof. It does not threaten to disappear the moment attention shifts. Resonant love feels like standing in a room where you do not need to hold your breath. This does not mean that resonant love is without challenge. It does not mean conflict never arises. But when conflict happens within resonance, it is held differently. There is a shared field of trust beneath the disagreement. You are not fighting to survive. You are adjusting to restore balance. From a quantum perspective, this mirrors entanglement beautifully. Two entangled particles do not become identical. They retain their unique states, but when one changes, the other adjusts accordingly. Not because it must, but because they are expressions of the same system. In human relationships, deep love works the same way. When one person grows, the other feels the shift. When one struggles, the other senses it. Not always consciously, not always accurately, but the connection remains responsive. This responsiveness is what people often call intimacy. Intimacy is not about sharing everything. It is about being reachable. It is about allowing the other person to register your presence, even when words fail. It is about staying open enough that the field between you remains alive. This also explains why love does not end cleanly when relationships end. Forms change, agreements dissolve, lives move in different directions, yet the resonance often lingers. People feel each other long after contact has ceased. Memories surface unexpectedly. Emotions rise without obvious cause. This is not weakness. It is coherence, adjusting to change. Just as entangled particles remain connected even when separated, human resonance does not vanish simply because proximity does. The system reorganizes, but the history of alignment remains part of the field. Understanding this can bring relief rather than pain. Many people suffer because they believe they should be over someone by now. They judge themselves for still feeling something, as if lingering connection is a failure of will. But connection does not obey will. It obeys relationship. Healing does not mean severing resonance. It means allowing it to transform. When you stop fighting the feeling, it loosens naturally. When you stop insisting on erasing the past, the present gains space to breathe. Resonance fades when it is acknowledged, not when it is resisted. This perspective also helps us understand why love feels less like something we chase and more like something we recognize when it arrives. You do not manufacture resonance. You notice it. You step into it. Or you step away when it is not there. This noticing requires honesty. Many relationships struggle, not because love is absent, but because resonance is being forced where it does not exist. People try to align through effort, sacrifice, or control. They mistake endurance for connection. Over time, exhaustion replaces intimacy. Resonance cannot be negotiated. It can only be allowed. This does not mean giving up responsibility or discernment. It means paying attention to how connection feels in the body. Does it expand or contract? Does it invite presence or demand performance? Does it support truth or require pretense? These questions are not judgments. They are signals. When love is resonant, it supports growth without pressure. Each person becomes more themselves, not less. The relationship becomes a place where defenses soften and authenticity deepens. You do not need to shrink to belong. You do not need to inflate to be seen. You are met where you are. This is why love, at its deepest, feels less like falling and more like landing. From this place, even solitude changes. Being alone no longer feels empty. It feels complete. Connection does not vanish when the other person leaves the room. It remains as a steady sense of belonging within yourself. This is the paradox of resonance. The more deeply connected you are, the less dependent you feel. You do not cling because you trust the field that holds you both. Quantum entanglement does not tell us that love is guaranteed or permanent in its forms. It tells us that connection operates beyond simple cause and effect. It tells us that relationship is not just interaction, but participation in a shared reality. When you love from this understanding, you stop trying to extract certainty from another person. You stop asking them to complete you. You stop fearing distance as abandonment. You love as an expression of coherence, not lack. This kind of love is deeply healing, especially for those who have known chaos. It teaches the nervous system a new pattern. It shows the body that closeness does not always lead to harm. It allows trust to rebuild slowly, organically, without forcing. And perhaps most importantly, it changes how you love yourself. When you understand love as resonance rather than performance, you stop demanding that you be different in order to be worthy. You stop chasing approval. You stop equating love with suffering. You begin to treat yourself with the same gentleness you once reserved for others. This is not self-indulgence. It is alignment. In a universe shaped by entanglement, love is not an exception to the rules. It is a reflection of them. It is what happens when awareness recognizes itself in another form and responds with openness rather than fear. You do not need to prove love. You do not need to hold it tightly. You do not need to explain it away. You only need to notice how it feels when it is real. It feels steady. It feels familiar. It feels like something ancient and quiet saying, without words, you belong here. And in that feeling, effort dissolves. Control loosens. The heart rests, not because love solved all problems, but because it revealed a truth simple enough to trust. That connection was never something you had to earn. It was something you were always capable of entering. The moment you allowed resonance to lead instead of fear. 7. Why you feel lost in the modern world. There is a quiet ache that many people carry today. One that does not always have a clear story attached to it. You can have a full calendar, a functioning life, even people around you, and still feel strangely untethered, as if you are moving through the world without a place to rest. This feeling is often called loneliness, but that word does not fully capture it. It is not always about being alone. It is about feeling separate. Modern society has taught us, subtly and consistently, that we are meant to stand on our own. From a young age, we are encouraged to be independent, self-sufficient, competitive. We are told, directly and indirectly, that life is a struggle, and that survival belongs to those who push harder, adapt faster, and rely less on others. Over time, this message sinks deep into the body. You learn to manage everything yourself. You learn to keep moving, to stay productive, to prove your worth through output. You learn to hide uncertainty, to contain vulnerability, to treat rest as something that must be earned. And slowly, without noticing, connection begins to feel optional, even risky. This way of living creates a strange paradox. You may be constantly connected through technology, yet feel profoundly disconnected in your inner life. Messages travel instantly across the world, but the heart remains guarded. We communicate more than ever, but listen less. We share constantly, but reveal very little. This is not a personal failure. It is a cultural conditioning. When society frames individuals as separate units, competing for limited resources, it trains the nervous system to stay alert, to scan for threat, to prioritize control over trust. In this state, connection feels like a liability rather than a source of safety. And yet, beneath this conditioning, reality tells a very different story. At the deepest level, as quantum physics quietly reveals, everything exists within relationship. Nothing functions in isolation, not particles, not ecosystems, not human beings. Life organizes itself through networks, through cooperation, through constant exchange of information. The irony is painful and simple. We live inside a vast web of connection, but we are taught to experience ourselves as alone. This creates what might be called an illusion of loneliness. Not loneliness because you are truly isolated, but loneliness because your perception has been trained to overlook connection. Like standing in sunlight while insisting it is dark because you forgot how to open your eyes. Many people internalize this illusion and turn it inward. They assume something must be wrong with them for feeling disconnected. They search for explanations in personality traits, past mistakes, or perceived inadequacies. They try to fix themselves, thinking that once they become better, more confident, more successful, the sense of belonging will finally arrive. But belonging does not arrive through improvement. It arrives through remembering. You do not feel lost because you failed to connect. You feel lost because you were taught to forget that connection is already present. This forgetting often happens gradually. It begins when you learn to override your feelings in order to function. When you ignore your body's signals because they slow you down. When you dismiss intuition because it does not fit productivity schedules. When you replace presence with performance, over time, life becomes something you manage rather than something you participate in. You navigate from task to task, goal to goal, without ever fully arriving. And the soul, for lack of a better word, begins to feel unseen. This sense of being unseen is not always about others failing to notice you. Often, it is about you no longer noticing yourself. In a connected reality, awareness thrives on relationship. When you relate only through roles and functions, you lose touch with the deeper movement of being alive. You may succeed outwardly while feeling hollow inwardly, because the field of connection that sustains meaning has been neglected. The modern world is not inherently wrong or hostile. It is simply out of balance. It emphasizes speed over depth, efficiency over presence, individuality over relationship. These values are not evil, but when they dominate without counterweight, they distort our experience of reality. This distortion shows up as anxiety, burnout, numbness, and a vague sense that something essential is missing. Many people try to escape this feeling by seeking constant stimulation. They fill their days with noise, distraction, and achievement, hoping that movement will replace meaning. Others withdraw completely, believing isolation will protect them. Both strategies are attempts to cope with a deeper misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is this: you were never meant to carry life alone. Quantum Entanglement offers a gentle reminder that connection is not something added on top of existence. It is existence. You are not a solitary point moving through an empty universe. You are a node within an immense network of relationships, visible and invisible, physical and emotional. When you forget this, life feels like a burden. When you remember it, life feels like participation. This remembering does not require drastic change. You do not need to abandon your responsibilities or withdraw from society. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to soften the belief that you are on your own. This softening begins with small acts of presence, pausing to feel your breath, allowing emotion without immediately fixing it, listening without preparing a response, letting yourself be affected without losing yourself. These moments restore sensitivity. They reopen channels that were never truly closed, only ignored. As sensitivity returns, so does the sense of belonging, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet familiarity. You notice that the world responds when you pay attention, that people soften when you stop performing, that your own body feels less tense when you stop bracing. Connection reveals itself through experience, not argument. Loneliness begins to loosen its grip, not because your circumstances changed, but because your perception did. You start to see the threads that were always there, connecting you to others, to nature, to your own inner life. You realize that the feeling of being lost was not a sign of abandonment, but a signal pointing home. Home, in this sense, is not a place or a group. It is a way of relating, a way of being with life that acknowledges interdependence rather than denying it. This does not make you weak, it makes you real. Strength in a connected universe does not come from isolation. It comes from coherence, from allowing yourself to be part of something larger without losing your individuality, from trusting that support does not erase agency. When you begin to live from this understanding, something shifts. You stop asking why you feel so alone, and start asking where connection is already present but unnoticed. You stop blaming yourself for disconnection and start listening for what is being asked to be felt. The modern world may continue to move quickly, to reward independence, to value productivity. But you do not have to let those values define your inner life. You can participate without being consumed. You can engage without forgetting yourself. And most importantly, you can remember that the sense of being lost was never evidence that you were disconnected from life. It was evidence that life was calling you back into relationship, back into awareness, back into the truth that nothing meaningful exists in isolation. And neither do you. When this truth settles, even gently, the world feels less hostile. You feel less like a stranger passing through and more like a participant with a place. Not because the world suddenly welcomed you, but because you finally recognized that you were never outside of it in the first place. 8. How awareness of quantum entanglement changes the way you live. There is a moment when understanding stops being intellectual and begins to settle into the body. And this is where awareness of connection quietly changes the way you live. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way that feels irreversible once it has been seen. You begin to move through life with less tension, not because circumstances suddenly improve, but because something fundamental in your orientation toward the world has shifted. When you truly understand that you are not alone, not in a sentimental sense, but in a structural one, the nervous system responds. Much of the vigilance you have been carrying without realizing it starts to loosen. The constant scanning for threat, the subtle bracing against disappointment, the habit of expecting to be left to handle everything by yourself, all begin to soften. This softening is not weakness, it is relief. Most people do not realize how much energy they spend defending themselves against life. They plan, anticipate, control, and manage not because they are greedy for power, but because they are afraid of being unsupported. They learned early on, often without anyone meaning to teach them, that safety depends on self-reliance. Quantum entanglement quietly challenges that belief. When you see that reality itself is relational, that nothing exists in isolation, the idea that you must stand alone starts to feel unnecessary. You do not suddenly become careless or passive. You simply stop fighting everything as if it were an enemy. This is where listening begins to replace control. Instead of forcing outcomes, you start paying attention to how things feel as they unfold. You notice subtle signals in your body, in your emotions, in your environment. You sense when something is aligned and when it is not as a judgment, but as information. This kind of listening does not slow you down. It actually conserves energy. Control requires constant effort. It keeps the mind busy and the body tense. Listening, by contrast, allows intelligence to emerge naturally. You respond instead of react. You adjust instead of resist. You collaborate with life rather than trying to dominate it. Many people fear that if they stop controlling, everything will fall apart. But what often falls apart first is the illusion that control was ever fully possible. And what remains is something far more stable: presence. When you live from the understanding that you are part of a connected field, presence becomes practical rather than philosophical. You show up more fully because you are not preoccupied with defending your position. You hear others more clearly because you are not preparing your counter-arguments. You feel more deeply because you are not constantly numbing yourself to stay functional. Life becomes softer, not because it stops being challenging, but because you stop meeting every challenge with resistance. Resistance is exhausting. It tightens the body and narrows perception. It creates the sense that life is happening against you rather than with you. When resistance drops, even slightly, experience opens. You begin to notice that many of your struggles were not caused by events themselves. but by the way you braced against them, the way you told yourself you had to endure alone, the way you assumed that if something went wrong, you would have no support. Entanglement awareness dissolves that assumption. Support does not always come in the form you expect. It may arrive as clarity, as timing, as a conversation that shifts perspective, as a pause that allows insight to surface. But when you stop insisting on control, you become more receptive to these forms of support. This receptivity changes decision-making. Instead of forcing choices based on fear or urgency, you begin to sense what aligns with your deeper movement. Decisions feel less like battles and more like adjustments. You choose not because you must prove something, but because something resonates. This resonance does not guarantee comfort, but it does provide coherence. Even difficult experiences feel different when you are not meeting them from isolation. Pain is still painful. Loss still hurts. But the underlying sense of abandonment begins to fade. You are no longer asking, "Why is this happening to me?" in a way that assumes punishment or randomness. You begin to ask, "What is being asked of me here?" with curiosity rather than despair. This shift alone can be life-changing. When you stop seeing yourself as separate from life, compassion naturally increases, both toward others and toward yourself. You recognize that everyone is navigating the same field, carrying their own histories, responding to their own perceptions. Judgment softens because separation dissolves. This does not make you permissive or naive. It makes you discerning without being harsh. You still set boundaries. You still make choices. But you do so from clarity rather than fear. Boundaries become expressions of self-respect, not defenses against imagined threats. The body also responds to this shift. When you live in constant defense, the body remains in a state of low-grade stress. Muscles stay tight. Breathing becomes shallow. Rest never feels complete. When awareness of connection settles in, the body receives a different message. It learns that it does not have to stay on guard all the time. This allows healing to happen more naturally. You may notice that you sleep more deeply. That tension releases from places you did not know were holding it. That emotional reactions soften without effort. These changes are not achievements. They are responses to a safer internal environment. Safety, in this sense, does not mean the absence of challenge. It means the presence of trust. Trust not in outcomes, but in relationship. Trust that you are not moving through chaos alone. Trust that intelligence larger than your personal mind is at work, not to control your life, but to support its unfolding. This trust does not eliminate responsibility. It reframes it. You still participate actively in your life, but you do not carry it as a burden. You engage with care rather than urgency. You allow room for uncertainty without panic. You accept that not everything needs to be solved immediately. This acceptance creates space for creativity. When you are no longer consumed by fear, imagination opens. New possibilities appear not because you forced them, but because you finally had the space to notice them. Life becomes less about surviving and more about exploring. This is one of the most profound changes awareness of entanglement brings. It returns curiosity to the center of living. Instead of asking how to protect yourself from life, you begin to ask how to participate more fully. Instead of trying to predict and control, you become interested in listening and responding. Instead of bracing for impact, you meet experience with openness. This openness does not guarantee ease, but it does guarantee aliveness. And over time, something else happens quietly. You stop taking things so personally. When you see yourself as part of a larger field, you recognize that not every challenge is a judgment. Not every obstacle is a failure. And not every loss is a reflection of your worth. Life becomes less about proving yourself and more about expressing yourself. This shift is deeply liberating. You no longer need to defend your existence. You no longer need to justify your presence. You no longer need to earn the right to belong. You belong because you are already part of the system. Awareness of quantum entanglement does not add meaning to your life. It reveals the meaning that was already there, obscured by fear and isolation. It does not promise happiness. It offers alignment. Alignment between thought and feeling, between action and intuition, between self and world. When you live from this alignment, even ordinary moments feel different. Conversations deepen, silence becomes nourishing, movement feels more intentional, rest feels deserved rather than stolen. Life does not become perfect, it becomes real. And in that reality, you discover that you no longer need to stand in opposition to life. You can stand within it, not fighting, not retreating, just present, responsive, and quietly supported by the same field that holds everything else together. This is not a philosophy to adopt. It is a way of living that emerges naturally when the illusion of isolation dissolves. And once it does, life begins to meet you with the same softness you finally allowed yourself to offer it. 9. Healing begins. When you remember connection, there is a moment, often quiet and easily missed. When the struggle to fix yourself finally loosens its grip, it does not happen because you found the right technique, read the right book, or disciplined yourself into improvement. It happens because something in you grows tired of fighting, and in that exhaustion, a deeper truth begins to surface. Healing was never about becoming someone else. Most people come to healing carrying the belief that something is broken. They search for the flaw, the wound, the missing piece, convinced that if they can just repair it, life will finally settle. This belief is understandable. Pain teaches us to look for causes, and modern culture reinforces the idea that problems are solved through correction and control. But connection tells a different story. From the perspective of a connected universe, healing is not a mechanical process. It is a relational one. It does not begin with analysis. It begins with remembering where you belong. When you feel disconnected, the body contracts. Muscles tighten. Breathing becomes shallow. The nervous system shifts into protection. Thoughts circle endlessly, trying to anticipate danger or prevent loss. Over time, this state becomes familiar. You mistake it for who you are. Healing does not demand that you push against this state. It invites you to soften into something deeper. When you remember connection, even briefly, the body responds immediately. The shoulders drop, the jaw loosens, the breath deepens without instruction. This is not imagination. It is physiology. The body recognizes safety, not through words, but through relationship. This is why healing often begins in moments of genuine connection rather than in moments of effort. A conversation where you feel seen, time spent in nature where nothing is demanded of you, a quiet moment of self-honesty where you stop pretending to be okay. These moments do not fix anything. They allow. When you allow yourself to connect, the nervous system recalibrates. It shifts from defense to regulation, from vigilance to responsiveness. The mind follows the body's lead. Thoughts slow. Perspective widens. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel workable. This is not because problems disappeared. It is because you are no longer facing them alone. Connection, in this sense, is not emotional dependence. It is biological truth. Human beings evolved within relationship. Our systems are designed to regulate through presence, touch, voice, and shared experience. When these are absent or withheld, the system struggles, no matter how strong or intelligent the individual may be. Modern life often interrupts these regulating connections. We isolate in the name of independence. We numb in the name of productivity. We distract in the name of coping. And then we wonder why we feel unwell. Healing asks us to reverse this pattern gently, without blame. When you reconnect with others in an honest way, not through roles or performances, but through shared humanity, something shifts. You do not need to explain yourself fully. You do not need to be impressive. You only need to be present. Presence is medicine. The same is true for nature. Many people underestimate how deeply the body responds to natural environments. Trees, water, open sky, and living rhythms provide a kind of coherence that the nervous system recognizes immediately. Time in nature is not a luxury. It is regulation. When you sit quietly near something alive and unhurried, your own system begins to remember how to settle. Thoughts lose urgency. Emotions move without getting stuck. The body synchronizes with rhythms that existed long before your personal struggles began. This is not poetic language. It is biology in a connected field. But perhaps the most challenging connection to restore is the one with yourself. Many people carry an internal split. Parts of them are pushed away, judged, or ignored because they hold pain, fear, or shame. Healing is often imagined as eliminating these parts, but elimination only deepens separation. True healing begins when you turn toward yourself with curiosity rather than correction. When you allow yourself to feel what you feel without immediately trying to fix it, something unexpected happens. The feeling changes, not because you forced it, but because it was finally allowed to move. Emotions are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be felt, recognized, and integrated. Integration happens through connection. You connect with the sensation in your body. You connect with the memory beneath the reaction. You connect with the part of you that learned to survive in a particular way. This is not indulgence. It is responsibility at a deeper level. When you stop fighting yourself, energy once spent on self-defense becomes available for living. Creativity returns. Humor returns. Even resilience feels different. It is no longer brittle. It is flexible. This is why healing often feels less like effort and more like relief. Quantum entanglement offers a subtle parallel here. Just as entangled particles remain connected even when separated, parts of yourself that seem fragmented are not truly lost. They are waiting for reconnection, not replacement. Healing does not require you to create wholeness. Wholeness is already present. Healing requires you to stop reinforcing the illusion of fragmentation. When you remember this, the question changes. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you begin to ask, "What am I disconnected from right now?" Often, the answer is simple. You are disconnected from rest, from honesty, from warmth, from play, from stillness, from your own breath. Reconnection does not require dramatic intervention. It requires small, consistent acts of allowing yourself to pause without guilt, allowing yourself to receive support without shame, allowing yourself to be affected by beauty without dismissing it, allowing yourself to grieve without rushing through it. Each act of allowing sends a signal to the body that it is safe to regulate, and when regulation returns, healing follows naturally. This does not mean healing is always comfortable. Reconnection can bring buried emotions to the surface. Old grief may rise, long-held tension may release, but these movements are signs of life returning, not signs of failure. A system that has been disconnected does not heal by force. It heals by re-establishing relationship. As you remember connection, you may notice that your sense of identity shifts. You stop defining yourself by what is wrong or what needs improvement. You begin to see yourself as part of a larger process, one that includes struggle and growth without reducing you to either. This perspective is deeply compassionate. You no longer see healing as a destination you must reach in order to be worthy. You see it as an ongoing movement of remembering and reconnecting. Some days you feel aligned. Some days you forget. Neither defines you. What defines you is your capacity to return. Return to presence. Return to relationship. Return to the field that holds you, even when you feel lost. Healing begins the moment you stop treating yourself as a problem and start treating yourself as a participant in a connected reality. When you remember that you belong, not because you earned it, but because you exist, the body responds, the mind softens, the heart opens just enough to let life back in. And life, when allowed, has an extraordinary capacity to organize itself toward wholeness, not through force, not through perfection, but through connection, remembered again and again, in the quiet, ordinary moments where healing actually lives. 10. From science to awakening, you are part of the whole becoming aware of itself. At a certain point, when the ideas settle and the noise quiets, something very simple begins to emerge. Quantum entanglement does not ask you to believe in anything mystical or otherworldly. It does not whisper secrets meant only for a few. What it reveals is almost disarmingly plain. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything participates. Everything relates. This is not poetry added on top of science. It is what the science itself is pointing toward. For a long time, we assumed the universe was made of separate objects interacting across empty space, like billiard balls colliding on a table. Consciousness, in this view, was something accidental, something that happened inside a few complex brains by chance. Meaning was optional. Connection was secondary. But the deeper physics looks, the harder it becomes to maintain that story. At the most fundamental level, reality behaves like a unified system. Particles do not act independently. Space and time soften. Information appears to be shared across what we once thought were absolute boundaries. The universe begins to look less like a machine and more like a living field in constant relationship with itself. Quantum entanglement does not say that reality is magical. It says that reality is relational. And when you stay with that insight long enough, it inevitably turns inward. If everything is related, if nothing stands alone, then consciousness cannot be an isolated observer standing outside the universe looking in. Consciousness must be part of the same field it observes. Awareness is not separate from reality. It is one of reality's expressions. This is where awakening begins, not as an event, but as a shift in understanding. Awakening is often misunderstood as something dramatic, something that elevates a person above ordinary life. But true awakening is far quieter than that. It is the moment you stop placing yourself outside of existence and recognize that you have always been inside it. Participating, influencing, responding. You are not a visitor in the universe. You are one of its ways of knowing itself. This does not inflate the ego. It humbles it. When you see yourself as a fragment cut off from the whole, you feel small and defensive. When you see yourself as the whole pretending to be a fragment, something relaxes. You no longer need to prove your worth or secure your place. You already belong, not by agreement, but by nature. In this light, individual consciousness begins to look like a localized lens through which the universe experiences itself. Not the only lens, not a superior one, just one expression among countless others. A moment of awareness shaped by particular conditions, memories, and biology. This does not diminish your uniqueness. It explains it. You are unique in the same way every wave is unique. Even though all waves are made of the same ocean, the ocean does not lose itself by forming waves. It experiences movement, shape, and rhythm through them. Similarly, the universe does not lose itself by becoming you. It experiences perspective. This perspective reframes the meaning of your life in a way that is both grounding and liberating. You are not here to complete some cosmic task or fulfill a predetermined role. You are here to experience, to sense, to feel, to learn, and to respond. Your awareness is not an accident. It is participation. From this understanding, many questions begin to fall away. You no longer need to ask whether your life matters in some abstract, universal sense. It matters because it is happening, because it is part of the process through which reality knows itself. Meaning is not assigned from above. It emerges from engagement. This is why presence feels so alive. When you are fully present, not lost in memory or projection, not bracing against what might happen next, something opens. Awareness feels spacious. The mind quiets. The sense of being separate softens. You are not thinking about life. You are inside it. Presence is not a spiritual technique. It is a state of alignment with how reality actually works. In presence, you are no longer an observer standing outside the moment. You are the moment knowing itself. This is not an abstract idea. It is something you have likely tasted in simple ways. During a walk, a conversation, a moment of beauty, or even a moment of grief that brought you fully into the now. Those moments feel real because they are real. They are moments when the illusion of separation relaxes just enough for truth to be felt rather than understood. Quantum entanglement supports this, not by explaining consciousness away, but by placing it back into the fabric of the universe. It suggests that awareness is not an anomaly in a dead cosmos, but a natural expression of a relational reality. This does not mean that the universe is consciously thinking in the way humans do. It means that consciousness, at various levels, may be intrinsic to how reality organizes itself. Awareness may not be something added on at the end, but something present all along, taking different forms. This perspective changes how you relate to your thoughts. Thoughts no longer feel like the center of who you are. They become movements within awareness, not definitions of it. You can watch them arise and pass without identifying with every story they tell. This creates space. Space brings freedom. You are no longer trapped inside your thinking. You are the field in which thinking happens. This also changes how you relate to suffering. Pain does not disappear when you awaken to connection, but it is no longer interpreted as meaningless or isolating. Suffering becomes part of the human way the universe explores contrast, limitation, and growth. You are not punished by pain. You are informed by it. This does not romanticize suffering. It contextualizes it. When you know you are part of a larger whole, pain does not define you. It passes through you, leaving traces of wisdom rather than permanent scars. If it is allowed to move rather than resisted, this understanding fosters compassion, not as a moral obligation, but as a natural response. When you recognize that others are also expressions of the same field, struggling in their own ways, judgment loses its appeal. Harshness feels unnecessary. You do not become perfect. You become softer. You still make mistakes. You still feel fear. You still experience loss. But these experiences no longer convince you that you are alone in a hostile universe. They become part of a shared human story, unfolding within a connected reality. This is what awakening looks like when it matures. It does not seek escape from the world. It engages with the world more honestly. It does not reject science. It listens to it carefully. It does not cling to belief. It rests in experience. From this place, even ordinary life becomes meaningful. Washing dishes, speaking with a neighbor, sitting quietly at the end of the day, all become expressions of participation. There is no need to transcend the human experience. The human experience is where awakening lives. Quantum entanglement does not ask you to abandon reason. It invites reason to expand, to include relationship, context, and wholeness alongside analysis and measurement. It invites a both-and understanding rather than an either-or one. You can honor science without reducing life to mechanics. You can honor spirituality without abandoning grounded reality. In fact, this integration may be one of the most important movements of our time. A world that understands connection at a fundamental level is less likely to dehumanize, less likely to exploit, less likely to reduce living systems to resources. When separation loosens, responsibility deepens. You care not because you must, but because you recognize yourself in what you touch. And perhaps the most profound shift of all is this: you stop asking who you are supposed to become, and start paying attention to who you are being right now. Being present, being responsive, being honest, being kind when possible, being firm when necessary, being human without apology. This is not small. This is the universe experiencing itself as you. In this moment, without needing justification, you are not here to escape the world. You are here to know it from the inside. You are not here to dissolve into the whole. You are here to express it, uniquely, temporarily, beautifully. Quantum entanglement does not strip mystery from existence. It refines it. It shows us that the mystery is not hidden behind reality, but woven through it. Everything is related, and you are one of the ways that relationship becomes conscious. When this is remembered, even faintly, life no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening through you. And in that recognition, there is a quiet peace. Not because all questions are answered, but because you realize you are not standing outside the question looking for answers. You are inside the unfolding itself, aware, participating, and never, ever truly separate from the whole that is learning to know itself through you. You do not need to seek connection. You are it. If there is one truth worth carrying with you after everything we have explored together, it is this: you were never truly alone. Not in the way you may have felt on long nights. Not in the moments when life seemed indifferent. Not even when you believed no one could understand what you were going through. What you experienced was not abandonment by reality, but a habit of perception shaped by separation. For most of our lives, we are taught to look at the world as if it were divided into pieces. Me here, life out there, others somewhere beyond reach. This way of seeing becomes so familiar that we stop questioning it. We assume that connection must be built, earned, or found, and when it feels absent, we blame ourselves or our circumstances. But the deeper truth is simpler and far kinder. You do not need to search for connection because you are already inside it. You always have been. Quantum entanglement did not introduce a new idea into the universe. It revealed something that was always operating beneath our assumptions. It showed us that separation is not the foundation of reality, but a surface appearance, useful for navigation, yet incomplete. At the deepest level, everything exists in relationship. Everything responds. Everything belongs. This includes you. When this understanding moves from thought into felt experience, something softens inside. The endless effort to become enough begins to lose its urgency. You no longer feel compelled to chase wholeness, because you begin to sense that wholeness was never missing. You were not broken. You were distracted. And distraction is not a failure. It is part of being human. So before we go any further, pause with me for just a moment. Let the rush of ideas settle. Let the need to understand everything fall away. Notice your breath as it moves in and out. Not because you are trying to calm yourself, but because breath is already happening without effort. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The quiet intelligence of muscles holding you upright. The subtle warmth or coolness of the air against your skin. This is not a technique. This is presence noticing itself. In this simple moment, you are not reaching for connection. You are experiencing it. Your breath does not need permission to move. Your heart does not ask whether it deserves to beat. Life is expressing itself through you naturally, effortlessly, without waiting for you to be ready. This is what connection actually feels like when it is no longer filtered through thought. It feels ordinary, grounded, available, like remembering something so obvious that you wonder how you ever forgot it. The image that stays with many people is a quiet one. Two quantum particles, born together, drifting apart across unimaginable distances, yet never losing their relationship, not because they are trying to stay connected, but because separation was never part of their nature. In the same way, you and life were never separate. Circumstances changed, stories formed, pain happened, distance appeared. But beneath all of that, the connection remained intact, patient, unbroken, waiting not to be earned, but to be remembered. This remembering does not require effort. It requires honesty. Honesty about how tired you are of fighting. Honesty about how long you have tried to carry everything alone. Honesty about the quiet longing to rest inside something larger than personal will. When you allow this honesty, connection reveals itself not as something dramatic, but as something deeply relieving. You realize you no longer have to prove your worth to belong. You no longer have to be strong all the time. You no longer have to hold yourself together through force. You belong because you exist. Living from connection changes the quality of your days in subtle but profound ways. You listen more than you push. You feel more than you judge. You respond more than you react. You allow space where you once demanded certainty. Life does not become perfect, but it becomes workable, softer, less adversarial. You stop asking why you feel incomplete and start noticing how much has always been supporting you quietly. The timing that guided you, the people who appeared when you needed them, the inner knowing that nudged you away from harm and toward growth, even when you did not understand it at the time. None of that was accidental. When you live from connection, you stop measuring yourself against imagined standards of wholeness. You stop trying to become enough, Because you realize that the sense of lack was never about what you were missing. It was about what you forgot to notice. You were never lacking connection. You were only focused on separation. And separation, once seen through, loses its grip. This does not mean you will never feel lonely again. Feelings still come and go. It means loneliness is no longer mistaken for truth. It becomes a signal, not a verdict, a reminder to return, not a sentence to endure. Return to the body, return to breath, return to presence, return to the understanding that nothing meaningful in this universe exists on its own, including you. In this returning, effort falls away. You do not strive to be enough. You allow yourself to be here. You do not chase fulfillment. You recognize completeness. You do not search for connection. You live as it. And perhaps that is the simplest truth of all. When you stop trying to fill an imagined emptiness, you discover that fullness was never something you had to create. It was something you had to remember. You are not a fragment looking for a whole. You are the whole, experiencing itself as a moment, as a life, as this breath right now. And when you live from that knowing, quietly, honestly, without performance or pretense, something extraordinary happens. Life meets you with the same openness you finally offer it. Not because you earned it, but because it was always waiting for you to remember who you are